Anytime you're ready, I am.
Hi, Chris. Hello,
Hello.
everybody. I'm Deb from the Leesburg Public Library, and we are so fortunate to have returned to us a local author, somewhat local, Florida author, who was here in the library in person last year. And this year we asked back to come back virtually. Christopher Balzono has a new book coming out, and he writes about haunted Florida. It's so fascinating. I'm going to let him talk about his current book and another one that's very interesting to all of us that's coming out soon as well. But Chris, first of all, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I would like to know, I know you have another life besides being an author talking about. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I mean, my primary job is I'm a high school teacher. I'm in my third year of high school. Before that, I taught middle school. And to be honest with you, the two things are very similar. They're equally as scary getting in front of kids as it is getting in front of what potentially might be a ghost. But they cross over too. One of the things I found that was really actually what got me back into doing what I do is that I was able to connect with kids through legends and myths and ghost stories more than I could the stories that were in the textbook, you know? And so I was able to actually reach out to them and say, oh, hey, you know, let's look at this, you know, how about this legend? How does this connect? And I remember, you know, doing entire lessons on things like Slender Man, and I still do a lesson on Spring-Heeled Jack, and it gets them just excited enough to listen to it. It's kind of like putting the cheese sauce on vegetables so that they'll eat it. And it's re-sparked my interest in it because I was thinking in my head, well, you know what? There's still an audience for this. And originally I got back into the paranormal to document myths that were going on in middle school and high school. And then of course, once you get your big toe in, it just kind of the rest of it draws you in. And then you're looking for things like Cow Cemetery over here and the ghost lights and trying to talk to Robert and things like that. And so it just avalanched back into doing what I love.
Wow.
Now, I'm also a single father too, which is pretty scary. And I often take my kids out. Like I'm actually going to mention very briefly a legend trip that we did in Leesburg a few months ago. Was interesting. But I use it as a way to teach them history, about a way to teach them how to tell a good story and all those other things. So my kids know more about weird Florida history than most kids their age know about normal Florida history.
Can you tell us about the Leesburg trip?
I will tell you about the Leesburg trip. It was part of my presentation, but I'll give it.
Okay.
So my son at that time, this was for spring break we did it. We originally planned to go up to Point Pleasant and see the Mothman, and we had planned to go to the old colony of Roanoke to like look into that mystery. And of course, because of the pandemic, we were reduced to day trips. And my son had gotten a guitar for Christmas, and he is obsessed with 80s rock and roll. So I don't know if you know where this story is going yet, but spring break happened to fall on the anniversary of Randy Rhoads' death. If people don't know who Randy Rhoads is, he's the amazing guitarist for Ozzy Osbourne after he was thrown out of Black Sabbath. He only had 2 albums plus a few other albums with a band called Quiet Riot, but he's considered this revolutionary guitarist because he brought classical music into heavy metal. And they were on tour, and they had to stop in Leesburg. There were problems with the car, and the guy who was driving the tour bus also could fly planes, and so he stopped off at the airfield, and they were kind of chilling out. He had done too many drugs, and he decided he was going to get into the plane, and he was going to fly these people around, Randy Rhoads being one of them, and he hit the bus. He clipped the bus, and it was a violent crash, and the crash was so horrible that they had to identify him through remnants of little things he was wearing and teeth, and it was really horrific.
Man.
The dream died that night. He was in his early 20s. I mean, this was a person who was going to change music and change rock and roll. And it said, this is where the legend part comes in. It said that you can still go to that airfield and hear the crashing of the plane. And that people have done that on his birthday. They hear a plane, even though they can't see it. Some people have actually seen the plane crash and then disappear. And so on the anniversary of his death, and we did it at dusk, this was early in the morning, but we couldn't get to Leesburg that early in the morning. We went out there, we were able to find a copy of the playlist that they had done the night before. And we went out in the field, and actually it was the ranch that was right there. We sat out there, we listened to Randy Rhoads' music as a way to hopefully evoke the spirits, if you will. And we were out there for probably about a good hour and a half. Now, while we were there, we all heard a plane. We could not identify it. It was a near cloudless night. Leesburg, you can see for miles in all directions, especially at that. Couldn't see a plane, but we could definitely hear one. We heard what sounded like a big bang, and then it was gone. And the difference between investigating, which is what I used to do in legend tripping, is I have no evidence for you. I can't show you a ghost plane. But what I can tell you is that all three of us who experienced it that night, my son, my daughter who was like, oh, can we just go on? I hate rock and roll music. And myself, we all were touched by that. We all felt that we had experienced the paranormal, and that on that anniversary, we had actually been able to make contact to some degree with Randy Rhoads.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is. And you know what? Like, I was able to spend time with my kids. We talked about music and ghosts for the 2.5 hours it took to get to Leesburg. We talked about the amazing things that had happened over the course of the week, because this was actually the last of the legend trips we did that week. And it was like, I can't think of a better way to spend my time than with kids, with legends, with rock and roll, and with a ghost.
You got it. So before you start your presentation today, just give us a quick recap on how teaching is going. How do you feel it's going so far? We're all very concerned with us that don't have kids in school, and we're not actually personally touched. We are all cheering you all on and thanking you for what you're doing. But just tell us how it's going.
You know, honestly, it's a new world. Before all this happened, I was one of the leaders in my district in technology. I had a Chromebook in my room a year and a half before everyone else. I was one of the beta testers for it.
Oh.
Helped develop curriculum for it. And that's all the technical side, right? And the technical side will always, when we introduce technology, be tough.
Yeah.
The kids are engaging. The kids are smiling, I think, behind their masks as much as they were. We have to distance ourselves. I mean, I still have a ton of kids in my room. I have to balance it between the kids that are teaching online. Honestly, the only bad thing for me has been taking attendance is crazy. But it's I think even after, especially after a week, it's business as usual. We've all kind of gotten used to the technology we have. And I think a lot of kids are just happy to be with other kids and learning things. Once again, my kids said to me, like, we're ready to learn. Like, it was a good break, but, you know, I felt I didn't get anything from the third quarter. And, you know, I have to say, I live in Lee County. Lee County, I think, is doing a really good job in terms of finding as many of the holes and the gaps in the technology and what kids are getting and filling them as they possibly can.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It sounds very positive even after a week. That's awesome.
It is. I'll tell you the real story afterwards, but yeah. No, and I'm the department head of my school in terms of the English department. And so I'm Mr. Positive because I've got to like trickle that down. And when I talk to my fellow teachers, the complaint is never the kids. The complaint's not the situation. The complaint is the technology and having to adjust. But then when you get to it, well, how are the kids? Oh, the kids are great in the classroom and I'm glad to be back. And so that's what I try to focus on.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Positivity.
Positivity.
So is it cool if I kick right into my presentation?
Please do.
Excellent. And some of this is going to be a little repeat, so I'll try not to make it as, especially in the getting to know me part. But today's presentation is called Florida's Haunted Love Stories. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this for right now and put it over here in the corner. and this as well up here, so that you guys can see the bottom stuff, because I'm a much more of a bottom note person than a top note person. Welcome to Florida's Haunted Love Stories. I'm Christopher Balzono. You guys have the added benefit today of being able to view this presentation and get a little bit of a preview of my new book, which is called Haunted Florida Love Stories. So switch those first two words. But also, it's kind of catered a little bit to explore some stories that are not in the book. So just by getting these, you can actually get a taste of what's going on, but not spoilers for a lot of the things that are in the book. Some of them are. And the good thing is, I think a lot of these are ones that you guys can actually go to yourself. You can experience these stories, at least 3 of the 4, and be able to try to see your own ghost or experience your own ghost. And it's from the files of Tripping on Legends. And Tripping on Legends is my radio show. Tripping on Legends is my radio show that I do. It's a podcast. It's now a weekly podcast. I'm on a network, so I'm forced to be in front of the camera doing my show every Tuesday night at 9 o'clock. But let me tell you a little bit about myself really quickly. I am from Massachusetts. I've been down here about 12 years now, but don't tell anyone I've been down here that long, because I still have my Massachusetts number and my Massachusetts cred, I like to say. And when I was in Massachusetts, I started to document stories that people were experiencing and real ghost stories that they were living in their own lives. And one of the things I noticed, having grown up watching a lot of ghost shows and read a lot of ghost books, reading a lot of ghost books, was that these same stories were being repeated time and time again. Someone would tell me a story about a town in Massachusetts, but I would have heard the same story about a place in Florida or Bethesda, Maryland, or Iowa. And I started to realize that, we experience the paranormal, we don't know how to process it, right? It's unusual for us. And we fall back on stories that we've heard or experienced our whole life as a way to understand the ghostly things that happen to us. I was an investigator for years. I wrote my first books about an area called the Bridgewater Triangle, which is in Massachusetts, which, that book is almost 15 years old and people are still asking me to come out and speak about it. That's how overwhelming that Bridgewater Triangle area is in Massachusetts. I also wrote several how-to manuals during my paranormal investigator years, which is Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. I have another one called Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film, which is a horrible book, so don't buy it. On the way, I published some other, more, around the country kind of ghost stories called Haunted Objects and Ghostly Adventures. My new book is right up here, Haunted Florida Ghost Stories. And this is my take on the paranormal. If you look at this picture right here of me, I am not a serious person. I take what I do very seriously, but I communicate with people in a very laid back way, which is not necessarily conducive to a lot of paranormal investigators who feel that they need to be very serious. I left investigating. I put everything back behind me, and I came back doing something which is called legend tripping. And the difference between legend tripping and investigating is an investigator tries to capture evidence, tries to explain why a ghost might be someplace. A legend tripper goes out and experiences things. And by experiencing things, I actually have probably gotten more evidence and had more encounters with ghosts than I ever did as an investigator. I also am the leading expert in the world, maybe, on this little guy right here, which is called a puckwudgie. And he is a real paranormal thing. He's like a little troll that people see in Massachusetts and other places across the country. And my research and kind of, uncovering him from dusty books has kind of made a big impact on the paranormal world. So there are a lot of people who think of me as the puckwudgie guy. I want to talk to you guys before I get into my first story. So I'll give a little teaser about what it is. It's Silver Springs. People say, why write a book called Haunted Florida Ghost Stories, right? Like, what is the connection between love and ghosts? And a great example of that is Silver Springs, because there are 2 things at work here. First is the spiritual. If you love something, if you are connected to it, if you are passionate about it, and by the way, passion also means hate, right? Because hate's the other side of love, not the opposite. It's more likely to bring you back as a ghost, right? If you love someone and you can't be with them anymore, you're more likely to come back as a ghost to be with them, even when you both die. If you loved looking over a cliff and watching the sunset, your ghost is more likely to come back to that spot and watch that same sunset. But the other element of it is kind of the more folklore element, which is love stories are known to us. So if you really do believe we experience something, we have to process it. We see, for example, we see a shadowy canoe, or we see ghost lights floating over the water at a place like Silver Springs. We can't explain it. But you know what? We have a love story. We know love stories. Romeo and Juliet is ingrained in everyone's mind, even if you've never read the play. And so those love stories and those common stories are what we fall back on. So I discovered as I was doing so many legend trips over the last 4 years, how many of them had love as a backstory. And I was actually able to put them together. One of my favorite is here in Silver Springs, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys where Silver Springs is. You guys are not too far away from it. But did you know it was haunted? Not only is it haunted, did you know that they advertised for years how haunted it was? And it was part of the allure. So if you don't know about Silver Springs, like maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've even been to it, it was founded with the idea that it was a perfect combination of the beautiful and the mysterious or exotic, because you have this absolutely beautiful spring, and then you have this crazy and yet beautiful and wild swampy area and the jungle around it and everything like that. And so they used it as a come see the best of Florida, come see where the worlds converge. Around 1870, someone had the brilliant idea of, if we replace the bottom of the boats, just so you can look here on the left, this is a modern version, not the ones they had back then. If we make the bottom of the boat glass, we can charge people to take these boat rides through the springs, and they can see everything down below. They were the first people to take that idea and make it commercialized, and Silver Springs blew up. It became the most popular place in Florida. It was Disney World before Disney World. And one of the main attractions, especially back then, was this area right here, which is known now. It's known as the Abyss, but back then it used to be known as the Bridal Chamber. And the boat captains would tell the story of Claire and Bernice. And Claire and Bernice is a great explanation. If you look up here, let me go back one slide for you guys. You'll actually see, or back one slide, you'll actually see this was an official advertisement for Silver Springs. And oddly enough, this man right here, his name is Claire. So I said Clarice, I think it's Claire and Bernice. Claire was the son of a wealthy cotton rancher in the area. And Claire was meant to inherit everything. Only Claire fell in love with Bernice. Now, Bernice was a lowly worker for Claire's father, and there was no way that he was going to allow his son to marry someone who worked with their hand. I mean, practically a peasant. And so what he did was he sent Claire away to Europe. And he figured that, he'll go over to Europe, he'll find another woman, he'll fall in love. Bernice, she's probably only looking for money anyway, so once she sees he's gone, she'll get over it. And as they left each other, Claire gave her an antique from his mother who had died, which was his absolutely beautiful bracelet. Well, Bernice did not get over it, and Claire did not get over it. Bernice's health fell. She couldn't get over her losing the man she loved. She wanted to be reunited with him. There's a woman named Auntie, and Auntie used to actually tell this story to people who went to Silver Springs. She said she was a young woman at this time, and she would go over to Auntie, and she would cry to her, and she got sicker and sicker and sicker. And as she did, she said, "I know that I'm going to die tomorrow. I want you to take me to the bridal chamber where Claire said that one day said that he would marry me. I can't stand to be without him. I want to end it on the spot where we fell in love." And so Auntie sailed her out to the Abyss, to the bridal chamber, and Bernice jumped into the water. And it said that when Bernice jumped into water and let herself float, the water itself lifted up and swallowed her and dragged her down. Well, Claire didn't get over Bernice either. And he came back only a few days later and asked Auntie where his beautiful bride to be was. And she told her that she had died, that he had died, and that she was buried essentially in the bridal chamber. And Claire went out there immediately himself. He jumped into the water, and it said that a single hand reached out from the darkness holding that bracelet and pulled him down into the water himself. And that those two souls, the two souls of Claire and Bernice, are the explanation of why there are ghost lights seen on the water at Silver Springs. Now, I've been to Silver Springs several times now. I've talked to the employees. Every employee there says the place is haunted. Every employee has their own story of something weird that's gone on there. Now, this legend is over 100 years old. This one's been around for a while, and they marketed it for a while as well, because they were actually experiencing things. People would see these unexplained lights on the water, unexplained lights in the trees. They would see a ghostly canoe that would make its way across the springs, and they had to come up with an idea for what it was. Employees today, especially security guards, the rangers that work at night, they all still see these ghost lights, which they believe are the ghosts of Claire and Bernice trying to reunite and trying to live on, or have their love live on past their death. Except there's another story, and that's kind of the way things go at Silver Springs. I talked to one employee who had been there a really long time. He was a boat captain, actually. And he said every person that buys the place, rather than going with what's successful, just tries to reinvent it. They're all, they all kind of forget why this place was great at the first time. In 1930, a guy by the name of Ross Allen, came to Silver Springs. Now, if you're from the area, you might know this name. He's the first one to bring animals into the park, right? They were very successful. People were coming, and they decided to build on it. So they bought more of the land, and they brought this guy in, and he brought animals and alligators and exotic snakes, and of course, the monkeys. So if you know Silver Springs, you know about the monkeys. They escaped. He thought if he put them on an island and didn't make any way to get off the island, the monkeys would be able to stay there, but the monkeys found a way off. They just used vines and clopped off. And if you know, they've pretty much overrun the park, and they're pretty dangerous in their own right. In 1935, Ross developed what was known as the Seminole Village. And it is said that the Seminole Village was actually built on burial mounds themselves. I'm sure you've heard the classic built on a Native American burial ground. It said that he actually plowed down a real Seminole village to make his fake Seminole village. And a lot of the hauntings that are going on there, a lot of the unexplained things, were because they disturbed that ground. But another interesting thing happened as well. Claire and Bernice became Navarro and Tulita. Okay? Instead of them being Americans and farmers and the whole class struggle, they became two Native Americans from tribes that did not like each other. And it's interesting because the tribes are never really mentioned which tribes they come from. Just that each of them was the child of the chief of the other tribe. And what had happened? Navarro's dad sent him away. He sent him into Georgia so that he could keep him away from this woman who he would absolutely not approve of marrying. Interesting thing is, in addition to the bridal chamber, the two lovers would meet on this area right here, which is called the Twisted Vine. And they would sit on that twisted vine, and they would spend hours talking to each other until they realized they had to go back to their families, and they would separate. Same things happens. Tallulah ends up getting sick, lovesick for the man that she loves. She jumps into the water, essentially committing suicide. Navarro makes his way back to Silver Springs a few days later, and seeing that she has passed, he jumps as well, right? And both of them are never seen except for their ghosts, which float on the water and are seen in the trees. So it's the same exact happenings, the same exact ghost story, only they just changed the characters to fit what was now a Native American appeal to Silver Springs. And they added one detail, two details really. When Tallulah died, she put a curse on, not a curse really, but a a blessing, if you will, on the vine. That if two lovers sit on this vine and kiss, they will forever be in love. Navarro, when he came, he kind of added to that and he said, if you put a white flower, which the woman he loved to put in her hair, and you can find them all over the springs, if you put it in your hair, if you put it in your shoe, your left shoe, you will one day walk with the person you love. But then I think he realized that love isn't always easy. So he said, if you put one in both shoes, then you'll get rid of someone who you no longer want to be with. I'm not saying that this legend is true or not true, but my girlfriend at the time put one in both of her shoes and we're no longer together. So that from what it is. But there's still another one, same area, same lights, same ghostly boat, same things being seen in the trees. And instead, this is the story of Okalawala, which I know I'm mispronouncing, and you guys can probably pronounce better, and Winona. Same story, Winona. Same or a very similar story. Different tribes, they're not allowed to be in love with each other. Only these guys decide to take the aggressive part of it, and they run away together. The problem is both of their fathers know they've run away, and they send people after them. And as the people are closing in on them, the ones that are meant to bring them back to their tribes, they look at each other and realize that they need to be together more than anything. So they go to the top of the cliff at Silver Springs and they jump to their death. One of my students drew this picture for me when I told her the story. I like the fact that you can't quite tell whether he's sad or whether he just pushed her, but I love that picture. And it's now said, once again, their spirits are stuck there. The added part of this is Okalawa runs in the water as well, which is why there are so many bodies of water in that area that have that name. And Winona's beautiful hair is actually this green vegetation which grows all over Silver Springs and in different parts of that part of Florida, of Central Florida. And so it's as horrific because they both die, but it has this beautiful twist to it. And the interesting thing is, people have told these stories for years, and they're nice, cute stories. Even with the suicide, they're nice, cute stories. But if you ask anyone that works in Silver Springs, they will tell you a ghost story. The place is really, really haunted, not necessarily by the spirits of the legends, but by other things. And so there's a new dance hall there where people have weddings. That's said to be haunted. And the gift shop is said to be haunted. And another place that's said to be almost like a focal point of the non-water hauntings is this little hallway right here. And it is filled with artifacts from the days of Silver Springs. It's like, if you want to know the history of Silver Springs, you walk down this hallway. And one of the things they found in the water was this broken down canoe. And of course, the old timers will tell you it's the canoe of Bernice and Claire, or it's the canoe of Navarro or Winona. They tell you that story. But what they don't necessarily tell you, unless you ask, is that it's extremely haunted. People have seen ghosts all through this corridor, including in the bathroom. And this is the door that leads into the ladies' room. And we had heard stories that from the people who work there, that you can be going to the bathroom and all of a sudden someone will enter, and then when you get out of the bathroom, there's no one there. Or that someone comes into the bathroom, they've looked out and they've seen a woman dressed in Native, or it looks like a Native American. She's dressed in Native American garb. When we were there, we heard this really odd scratching sound, which sounded like a scratching sound we had heard several different times when we were recording our radio show, which always had paranormal things attached to it. Whenever we would hear this, something weird would happen. And we caught just kind of the tail end of this, but I want to show this to you guys. Don't worry about the volume and what's being said. I'm going to show you guys the beginning part of that again, because it's pretty incredible. See that? The door just opens. There's no one on the inside of it. We tried to recreate that for over an hour, trying to see if we could create a wind tunnel to make that door open. It didn't do it. And it actually opened a little bit more right before that. And that's when we turned the cameras on and we were at least able to get the tail end of it. So there's something definitely going on there. I figure we might as well stick with the whole Romeo and Juliet story or motif, if you will, and talk about the story of Amos and Ingrid. And this is the story that takes place in Sarasota, Florida. If you know anything about Sarasota, Florida, it has one of the 3 largest populations of Amish people in the United States. We have Pennsylvania, we have Indiana, and then of course when it gets too cold, we have Sarasota. And this is a really popular area for tourists. It's a really popular area for Amish people who are trying to get away during the winter months, but there is a full-time year-round population there. There are episodes of Amish Haunted and Amish Boss were shot there at different times. And the interesting thing, which is part of the story, is that these communities like each other, right? They might not necessarily get along and have the same religious beliefs, but they like each other. This story, the story of Amos and Ingrid, kind of goes against that. Amos was the son of a farmer, a celery farmer, and he would take the buggy into town to sell his celery. And in doing that, he met Ingrid, who was the, just what he would call the English. And he immediately fell in love. And as often as they could, they would escape to this bridge right here. And they would kiss a little bit, hug a little bit, tell each other stories. It was really the only place where they could be alone with each other. And they talked about having a life together, right? Amos was going to be willing to give up his life with the Amish. Ingrid was willing to leave town so there wouldn't be any trouble with her parents. And they were going to be in love together forever. One night, they were set to meet at the bridge. And Amos was late in getting there. His father had begun to suspect that something was going on, and he sat him down to give him a good talking to. Ingrid got to the water, and it's a rocky area, and there's beautiful vegetation on both sides of this. And it's literally, if you're looking at it, this side of the bridge is where the Amish live, and this side of the bridge is where the rest of Sarasota is. And she was on her side waiting for Amos to come. And she decided to pluck some flowers out of the water. There were irises on the water. And she decided to pluck them. And she slipped and she fell into the water. When she fell into the water, she didn't die, right? This is one of those stories where she didn't die by falling. And she ripped her dress and she got a gash in her leg. And she decided, oh my word, like I can't be seen like this. I only live 10 minutes away. I'll run home really quick. I'll change. I'll bandage myself. Everything will be okay. He's not here yet anyway. So for reasons which are kind of unknown, she took her dress off so that her parents wouldn't see a wet and bloody dress, threw it out to the side, and ran home to go get changed before Amos could make his way back there. Well, Amos gets there, and he finds the dress. And he sees the tears, and he sees the blood, and more importantly, he sees it in the mouth of an alligator. He naturally assumes that an alligator has eaten the woman that he loves. He goes to the top of the bridge, he cries out her name, and he jumps to his death. Well, Ingrid was actually pretty quick in getting back from changing. She gets to the bridge. She sees the man that she loves face down in the water. She goes down to help him, but realizes that he's dead. So then she herself goes up to the bridge, shouts out the name of the man she loves, and jumps to her death. It's a really sad story because not only do we have these two communities which really kind of get along, but we also have these two people who just wanted to be in love. And unlike the ghosts at Silver Springs, these two spirits can never be together because people say they see the ghost of Amos on the north side of the river or the creek, I should say, and they see her on the south side. And they're often seen reaching out to each other, talking to each other, but the words can't be heard, reaching out for each other, but they can't touch each other. And they will never, ever be together because of the sin of suicide. Sounds like a pretty crazy story. And the people, and familiar, right? And the people who told me this story, I was emailed this. I rarely get that. Someone actually emailing a story from their town. So I love it. She said, and she was older, that as a child, she was told this story and she believed that it wasn't real, that it was a story to keep them away from the creek because it was too dangerous. I had other people email me and tell me that they've actually seen something there, unexplained. It could very well be a warning because there are at least two very dangerous things there. The first is there are homeless people who live all up and down the area where Amos and Ingrid used to meet and fall in love. There are both homeless English people and homeless Amish people, and they're all in that area. And when I went there once with my daughter for doing Tripping on Legends with Kids and her friend. And I went there once with my co-host at that time. And both times it was almost out of nowhere. It's so thick with vegetation and these people just kind of pop up and ask you a question and you're like, oh, hi, I didn't see you there. It's not the nicest section of Sarasota, especially the side that is the quote unquote English side. The other is alligators. I mean, there's an alligator in the story itself. So you have to assume that alligators play a part in the story. And when I went there, that's all people could talk about. I saw a father and a son fishing and they said, well, just got to be careful because, this place is filled with alligators. We saw another man there and he said, oh, I don't know that legend. All I know is the legend of the 40-foot alligator that's in this area. We saw several when we were hanging out at that creek. And we even asked the woman who owns the land that is supposedly where Ingrid's family lived. And she's like, oh no, the alligators are horrible here. We've had attacks here and things like that. So you think that this area, it might be a cautionary tale that this ghost story never actually happened, except we were in the wrong place because the actual ghost, it's called the Ghost Amish Bridge, isn't there at all. It is in Sarasota. It's actually on the other side of Pinecraft. It is this, you can see from the bridge is broken down. Nothing travels on it. You have to go on this path right here. And then it's so old and so decrepit that it's still there, right? And it's almost like a town legend. And yet no one actually can go on it anymore. And definitely no cars can go on it anymore. So now that I know where the real location is, I've got to go back out there. I've got to see if anything's there. So if any of you are willing to come out in the middle of the night and see if you can catch a glimpse of these two ghost lovers, let me know. Let's talk about another one. This is Julia, and this is a little bit closer to where you guys are. If you know anything about ghosts, and if you know anything about the villages and the area around it, you may have heard the story of Julia of Rolling Acres. And this is a typical, in a lot of ways, a typical, what I call wandering white woman, right? Its own WWW. Julia is said to walk this edge, the edge of Rolling Acres, right where it goes from cement and normal road into a dirt road. She is said to be wearing all white, or at least be glowing white. And she has been seen by people traveling that road for years, for decades, actually. If you don't know about Lady Lake, it's interesting. The name comes from, or where the name comes from is a legend in of itself. People say it has to do with the fact that if you look at the lake from above, it looks like a woman's head. But the other story, and the one people believe a little bit more, is that the Native Americans in that area called it Lady Lake because to that, in their words, a quote unquote white woman had died in the lake and they believed that she was coming back to that lake. And so they kind of, as a way to distinguish it, they called it that. I'm not sure if I believe that, but that's a much better story just than it looks like a woman's head from above, because how are you get high enough to even notice that, right, in those days? Julia fell in love with a man. The man is never identified. She fell out of love with a man and into love with someone else. Someone say that her parents didn't want them to be together, and so they encouraged her to meet someone else. Some say they had a falling out. The real driving force of the legend is that Julia finds another man to love, and this man is heartbroken. And so, like any sensible person who had their heart broken, he goes to where Julia lives and shoots her. And it's said, depending on the version of the story, it's said that while he's there as well, he commits suicide. He holds her dying in his arms and commits suicide. And that now her spirit is trapped and is forced to walk this stretch of road. I've been there. I've been there at night, and I've been there during the day. When you are there at night, it is a completely different experience. If you are there during the day, you can easily see that there are houses all around you, right? That there is maybe like a little bit of woods in front, but then there's a long driveway, and there's a really beautiful house. That over here, it's a little bit more rural, but nope, there's another beautiful house. It's populated, it's a little less populated where the dirt road starts, but it's pretty populated. When you go there at night, those initial trees are so dense that, yeah, you feel like you're in the middle. And this is at the edge of the Ocala Forest, which is the book I'm working on right now. You feel like you're in the forest. You feel like this is a road going through the forest, and it's dark at night, and it's spooky. And if you believe the legends, you can drive down this road, you can shut off your lights right at that stop sign, and you can turn them back on again, and Julia will either appear in your headlights or even in the back of the car with you. But then there's another story, and the other story involves ghost children. And the ghost children are very rarely seen, but they're heard. Imagine going out to Legend Trip Julia, but you don't turn the lights back on. Instead, you roll down your windows, you turn your car off completely, and you just sit there and wait. They say eventually you'll start to hear weird noises coming from the woods around you. You'll hear this growl, which doesn't sound like any animal that people can identify. All of a sudden, you'll start to hear children giggling and laughing. And then you'll, from the woods, hear a child start to scream and ask for mommy. And people say that they get so freaked out, they have to turn their car on immediately and pull out of there. There's something else in that area except for Julia. There are these ghost children. And the funny thing is that Julia is so famous in this stretch of road, the rolling acres in that area. She's blamed for everything. Everything that goes wrong in a house, people say, oh, that was Julia. People see a ghost in their living room, and it's a woman. They automatically say, it's Julia, it's Julia. So she's kind of famous, and she gets blamed for a lot of things. My belief is that Julia is not to blame at all. And this ghost might be the ghost of Nancy or Pamela. Nancy Lechner and Pamela Nader were abducted from Alexander Springs back in 1967, I believe it was. They were potentially abducted, even though no one was ever charged with the crime, by Florida's most notorious serial killer, Gerald John Schaefer. He died in jail. He was arrested in 1973. And he's the boogeyman of Florida. I mean, so many of the ghostly legends of Florida run into him. He is a man who was known to abduct 2 women at a time. He was a man who was known to bring them to a second location. And they have dropped the investigation for Nancy and Pamela. They have all but said that it was 100% Gerald John Schaefer. They have found evidence. So even though he's dead and he was never convicted of their crimes, he's to blame for it. Now, the interesting thing is when I was investigating Julia, when I was looking into the history of it, what I found is around the time of Nancy and Pamela, people found reason to go to Lady Lake. So this gentleman right here with the Lake County, Florida Sheriff's Department, this is not Alexander Springs. This is Lady Lake, and he's actually searching for the bodies there because they believe this is where the women were dumped, even though they were never able to be found. It's known that Schaefer brought people to secondary locations. I can just imagine that even if it's not Julia that is still walking that road. And of course, Julia becomes the name just because it's very similar to us. Every ghost is either Julia or Mary because they're common names to us. There's no Colleen the ghost walking a highway, right? It's always these names we're very familiar with. I believe there are at least those screams in the woods, that people are misidentifying kids as the screams of these women who were brought to the woods. Schaefer had a habit of bringing people to a secondary location and torturing them for hours. And so one can just imagine that those screams from the woods could potentially be the screams of these women. I hope I have time for my last one. Am I going to be able to talk about the next one? I know you wanted me to end at 45, but the best one is yet to come.
Please do. Keep going.
Okay, good. The next one is Fort DeSoto, which we used to call the legend trip that almost ended the show until it essentially ended the show because it was so emotional. If you look at this picture up here, you'll notice or not notice that this is a Tinder profile. We had decided that we were going to look into this ghost in Fort DeSoto, the first ghost I'm going to talk about, and it has to do with a lonely guy. The ghost of a fisherman who is said to hit on single women when they go to Fort DeSoto. And we're like, we have to do this. So as a joke to promote the show, we actually made this like fake Tinder profile. If you read the captions of it, it's actually all the different legend trips we've been on and funny little jokes. Unfortunately, this is usually the first picture that my students find of me online and show to their parents, and they go like, look at this weird thing, like it's him and a girl and they're looking for a... So this picture has gotten me into more trouble than I care to think of. So a guy by the name of Dalton Gray, they believe the guy's name is Dalton Gray. He died a pretty horrific death in the early 90s. Nothing unnatural. It was more of an argument that led to gunfire. And it was actually, he died hundreds of miles away. But this was his spot. Fort DeSoto was where he liked to be. If you don't know anything about Fort DeSoto, it has got to be, I call it Fort Inconsequential. It was established to reinforce Egmont Key, and it never shot its guns in war, only in practice. Soldiers were stationed there almost as a punishment. And if you look at how many soldiers were stationed there, it was like there were 1,000 soldiers. And then 2 months later, it was like, but we took 900 away. Now it's just 100. And then there's 5. I mean, it's no one wanted to be there because it was so swampy. The mosquitoes were so bad. The weather conditions were so bad that it essentially just became a nature reserve because no one would stay there. And a few soldiers were stationed there to kind of watch over that until they eventually left. Then it became this great park. Fort DeSoto is a great place to take your kids. Trust me, the yellow fever, the malaria, all that stuff is gone now. You'll enjoy it if you go there. There is this place called Bungalow Pass. And in the water here is said to be a flirty fisherman. If you are a single woman and you are out there and you're fishing or just waiting, an extremely handsome gentleman will approach you and start to talk to you and flirt with you. Everyone who reports that this has happened say that they are actually like into it. They kind of like this guy. He's good looking. He's very charming. They have whole conversations with him. They'll turn away to get their tackle box and they go up and the guy is gone. It's like the ultimate example of ghosting, right? He's also seen on this boardwalk as well as the water around it. And at this place called Fort DeSoto Gulf Pier, that's what it's called now. And he is said to have worked there back in the day when he was still alive. We went there. We weren't able to make contact with him. I guess neither of us were what he was looking for that night. But it's interesting because the restaurant bait shop was closed. And we went there the next day and we tried to talk to people and they rushed us out of the building very quickly. I've made several different calls to that business. And I always say, excuse me, I've just got a weird question. I'm going to follow up. Did a guy named Dalton Gray ever work there? And the older employees always say, I don't know what you're talking about. The younger employees, and this has happened to me twice, say, I'm supposed to say I don't know what you're talking about. In other words, it's something. And people have seen him enough and experienced enough that they kind of push it off. They don't want to be known as the place where this ghost may be. Fort DeSoto has other stuff that's wrong with it. We initially went there with the idea that it was going to be this fun little legend trip. We'd go out there. We'd have my co-host go out and fish and try to pick up this fisherman. And then we started doing our research and finding out a lot more about Fort DeSoto. For example, it opened in 1849, and it's really the second Fort DeSoto. The first Fort DeSoto was built near what is now Brooksville, pretty close to you guys, and it was built right on the phosphorus mine. So they couldn't get any water to it, and they had to close it, and this is the second Fort DeSoto. Excuse me. DeSoto himself is a pretty horrific guy. Even though he's kind of looked on in history as this kind of explorer, part conquistador, and there's a romantic aspect to him. He did some of the nastiest stuff and was responsible for ordering some of the nastiest stuff in Florida's history. And a lot of places that bear his name, DeSoto County has more paranormal sightings and UFO sightings than anywhere else in Florida. Other places with his name kind of have this negative reputation. Fort DeSoto is like that. That's why the fort failed, I believe. There's somewhat of a curse there. There's a reason why nothing was ever to be successful there. From 1889 into the 1940s, the primary function of Fort DeSoto was as a quarantine, primarily a yellow fever quarantine, and anyone who was coming into Tampa Bay who was thought to have any kind of disease had to go to Fort DeSoto first. In the 1980s, in 1980 itself, when the Skyway Bridge fell, the people who died, the ones that they fished out of the water, because it's right on the edge of where the Skyway Bridge is, were brought to Fort DeSoto, to the hospital in Fort DeSoto, where they used it as a morgue for those bodies. So imagine I think it was over 100 people who died or were injured were brought into that area. It's had a lot of grief. The saddest part for me is this idea that on the grounds, there were different areas depending on how sick you were. And it said that one woman who wasn't very sick had children, 3 children, who became very sick. And then they were brought off to another building, and she wasn't allowed to be with them when they died. She said to still walk this area of Fort DeSoto, crying and screaming for the children that she lost. It's a different kind of love. It's not that jokey, flirty love. It's this deep, deep sorrow. This woman is said to still walk this area, looking for her kids, calling out their names, crying, screaming, being seen as this kind of woman in black who wafts into the water. It's a really, really sad experience. And when we went there, you could feel that grief. You know, we were having a pretty good day of doing interesting ghost hunting things as the sun was setting and as we were at that foundation. And this is a picture of my co-host at the time at the foundation. The mood definitely changed. You could feel a sorrow. You could feel a sadness there. It's almost as if the grief that she felt has been implanted on there. Now, I'm going to do this. This is right as it was going. I'm going to play for you guys some voices. These are called EVPs. So if you don't know what an EVP is, it's electric voice phenomenon. And these are thought to be the voices of ghosts on tape. And when we go to locations, we just keep the tape running so we have a record of what's going on. Our rule is if we don't hear it on the car ride home through the stereo, it's not an EVP. I don't go searching. I don't spend hours analyzing and breaking them down. I want to play 4 for you really quickly, just because they really kind of capture the spirit. So if you have headphones, put them on. If you've got a volume, turn it way up. And I'm going to do the best I can so you guys can hear these. But it actually really if you have headphones. Are you ready, Deb?
Yep.
Okay, she turned her speaker way up. I love you. You're awesome. Okay, here's the first one. And this is one. Actually, I'm going to play this one first. Excuse me. This is the one normal one. But it's definitely making fun of me. So I'll play, and then it plays 3 times. So it's the whole thing and then the isolated part. And do you want me to tell you what to listen for ahead of time, or do you guys want to? I'll do both. I'll play it, I'll play it again so you guys can hear what you're looking for. I don't know.
Okay.
Here's being very unresponsive. Here we go. Here's the first one. And now it repeats. Now. Okay, so what you're going to hear, and it might be better later you put it on headphones, what you're going to hear is I'm talking and it says, a ghost responds to me by saying, "You talk to us too much." And then what you'll hear is, and then I've looped it, so you'll hear, "You talk to us too much. You talk to us too much. You talk to us too much." You'll hear it a little bit clearer. So I'll play this one again. This is the least creepy of the ones I have. Here we go. And then repeats. Okay, the next one I'm going to play for you. This one's kind of, I'm just going to tell you what it says so we don't have to spend as much time. What you're going to hear is, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go like this so I can make sure my volume is crazy up. I have like the worst laptop. It comes from the district. And you're going to hear, "We are not what you're expecting." And then it's going to repeat, "We are not what you're expecting. We are not what you're expecting." So here's this one. Right there, hear it? Now it repeats. Then it starts to get a little sadder. And this actually has a lot to do that you're not what we're expecting. I've recently gotten in contact with a psychic who wants me to go back to Fort DeSoto. I just did an episode of my show last night called "The Cases That Haunt Me." I really want to try to make contact with this woman and see if I can give her some kind of peace. And the psychic that I talked to said, there are other things there that are going to try to stop you, and these kind of this weird stuff that she was saying about it, which I don't fully believe. But it had to do with that whole "we are not what you're expecting" thing. Now, this is the little kid. And so what you're going to hear is I say something, my co-host says something, then I say something, and in between, right before I start to talk, you're going to hear a little kid say, "You scared me." I'm not sure if you guys will hear that one. I'm even with this bad computer, I was able to hear that one. It's really crazy. And then this is the one. This is the heartbreaker right here. This is the voice of the woman. And Natalie, my co-host, was talking to her, and she just was having a conversation at that foundation. And she essentially says to her, "I'm a mother too. It sucks. I know it. It sucks." And then what you hear is a voice that says, "You don't know how it feels. You don't know how it feels." So I'm going to play this one. This one is the one that is so sad that it kind of changes my perspective on things. Right there. You don't know how it feels. Yeah, and it's profound in that you always think of ghosts as away from you, or ghosts as something creepy or scary, or And when you hear that, she's interacting with us. She's talking to us. It was supposed to just be a legend, but she's real, right? Or someone like her is real, and they're stuck on that spot, and they're still feeling sadness. They're still feeling sorrow, and they're trying to communicate that to us. And they're saying essentially, you just don't know. You don't know what it's like. I want to free that woman. I want to go back to that location, and I want to see if I can do whatever I can to help her. And that is kind of the nature of love, right? So the new book is Florida's Haunted Love Stories, and it runs that gamut. It runs these gamut between these uplifting stories about people who come back to work at the place they love, to these ones that touch our soul because people can't find each other or you lose children. It is open in 1 week, right? On the 14th is when it is actually released. You can go onto Amazon right now and you can order 5 or 6 copies for you and your friends, so that you have plenty to read during Halloween and even for Valentine's Day. And it's this really interesting exploration of that kind of weirdness. Does anybody have any questions? This is all my contact information. So you can go to facebook.com/trippingonlegends. My Instagram is Spooky Tripping. My Twitter is Spooky Balzono. And the website, actually, I just switched it over, is actually trippingonlegends.com. So you don't even need to put the WordPress in. So if anyone has anything they want to ask me, I would be more than happy.
Chris, can you hear me, first of all?
Oh, yeah.
I just
I
wanted
see you
to
got
make
your
sure.
headphones in. Were you able to hear the voices?
No.
No. Oh, no.
I've got 2 devices going. I think that's why.
Okay.
I'm going to check it out afterwards.
Okay.
But if people wanted to order your previous books, do they go to your website?
You can just go straight to Amazon.
Straight as Amazon. Okay. All right. Great.
Yep. All of my, you can even, if you go to Amazon, follow my author's page and you can get updates on what's going on. And you can get episodes of my podcast and everything. So.
All right. Yeah. Because when you were here before, I noticed a lot of people were interested in buying everything that you had, one of each.
They were.
I want to make sure that people knew that they can get all of your books. Okay.
And especially because I have a Florida book now. You know what I'm saying? I was able to collect enough from this state that I was able to put it out. And now, like, as we talked a little bit about at the beginning, I'm doing a book entirely focused on the Ocala National Forest and the towns surrounding it.
Yes.
So it is a beast of a project because I thought I was going to be able to tell a few stories of Astor, a little Leesburg, maybe pick up a story here and there. And I posted, and I literally got 387 comments about weird things that were going on in the Ocala. And I've been the last 2 months trying to sift through things. And that was in historic Florida. It wasn't even in like a ghost site. It was just people who were experiencing this weirdness on a daily basis.
Wow. Well, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. How interesting and enjoyable and a little spooky for sure. And
I'm going to stop the recording.